This is America. Bisbee, Arizona, a town that's known as the Queen of the Copper Mines. Mount Pulaski, Illinois, where it's illegal for boys, not girls, just boys, to hurl snowballs at trees. Darien, Connecticut. Now, when the founders of this town couldn't agree on a name, a sailor who had traveled the world suggested Darien. That's the name of a port he had visited in Panama, of all places. Mackinac City and St. Ignace, Michigan, where the Mackinac Bridge between these two towns and over a strait between Lake Michigan and Lake Huron is the third longest suspension bridge in the world. The longest two are in Japan and Denmark. Tabor City, North Carolina, once known as the yam capital of North Carolina. It hosts an annual yam festival. Now, apparently there's a subtle difference between a yam and a sweet potato. Springfield, Massachusetts, where James Naismith invented the game of basketball in 1891. It's called basketball because the hoops or goals were peach baskets and the first balls were soccer balls. Lake Jackson, Texas, where jalapeno pepper jelly originated, was first marketed in 1978. Mount Ida, Arkansas, the quartz crystal capital of the world. Charleston, West Virginia, where the dome on the state capitol is 292 feet high. That's 4 feet higher than the dome of the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. Miles City, Montana, whose art and cultural center is located in a cave. This is America. Holly Springs, Mississippi, which has so many old mansions that it calls itself the antebellum capital of the Mid-South. Gig Harbor, Washington, this pretty little town on Puget Sound with a gorgeous view of Mount Rainier in the distance, is named for a small boat called a gig. It made several stops at that port when the place was part of the Oregon Territory. Prattville, Alabama, whose immense brick factory that made cotton gins was recently saved from the wrecker's ball by a determined group of citizens, including This is America Foundation Advisory Board member Ann Boutwell. Roseburg, Oregon, where in 1959, 14 people died in an explosion that occurred when someone carelessly parked an explosives truck right downtown overnight. Bayonne, New Jersey, where entertainer Jackie Gleason often performed at the Hi-Hat Club. Now, Gleason liked this town so much that he often mentioned it fondly in the famous TV show The Honeymooners. Ironton, Ohio. In the mid-1800s, this gritty little town on the Ohio River was a bustling center of the pig iron business. For 40 years, foreign nations bought this high-quality pig iron to build warships. In fact, the iron for the USS Monitor, America's first ironclad ship, was produced in Ironton. Enderlin, North Dakota. That's the home of the state's annual Sunflower Festival. Now, you might think that Kansas would be the king of the sunflowers in the United States, but North Dakota grows more sunflowers than any other U.S. state. Susanville, California. This town in Northeast California is one of the few U.S. places named after a woman. In this case, Susan Roop, the daughter of an early settler. Lampasas, Texas, a town in central Texas under which a number of mineral springs run. Not surprisingly, lots of health spas, which were said to cure anything and everything, grew up there. Hot springs were big business around the turn of the 20th century. Santa Fe, New Mexico, the highest capital city in the United States, at 7,000 feet above sea level. It's more than 1,000 feet higher than Colorado's capital, Denver, which is a mere 1 mile high, the Mile High City. This is America. Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where just this year, a sculpture of Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster, appeared out of nowhere, it seems, in the middle of Chippewa Lake. As far as we know, people seem to like it, so I suppose it will remain there, the Nessie Loch Ness Monster statue. Sargent's Township, New Hampshire, where nearby Mount Washington arguably has the nation's worst weather. It snows in July there, and once the highest wind gust on record was recorded, 231 miles per hour during a snowstorm in April of 1934. Yuma, Arizona, that's the hometown of Farm Workers Union organizer and civil rights leader Cesar Chavez. Silver Bay, Minnesota, one of the Minnesota towns along Lake Superior. Did you know that Minnesota has 90,000 miles of shoreline, more than California, Florida, and Hawaii put together? That, of course, includes some of Minnesota's famous 10,000 or more lakes. New Salem, Illinois, where Abraham Lincoln first held public office. He was postmaster. Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, originally a Norwegian settlement. Mount Horeb calls itself the troll capital of the world. Trolls are big in Scandinavia, and there are lots of carved wooden ones to be seen in Mount Horeb. Milford, Delaware, which calls itself the Garden City of the Twin Counties. Now that's a big deal because there are only 3 counties in Delaware. Fort Smith, Arkansas, which played a key role in the so-called Indian removal from eastern states to what was called Indian Territory in what is now Oklahoma. Thousands of Indians who were forced to walk the entire way died along what was called the Trail of Tears. Fort Smith was the place that organized the settlement of Indians in the Indian Territory. Kemmerer, Wyoming, where James Cash Penney opened the first J.C. Penney store in 1902. Grand Rapids, Michigan, that's President Gerald Ford's hometown. This is America. Jean Lafitte, Louisiana, the town on Lake Salvador, was once a hideaway of pirates, including the notorious Jean Lafitte himself. Fairbanks, Alaska, where the Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights, can be seen an average of 243 days a year. Elko, Nevada, home of the annual Cowboy Poetry Gathering. Lebanon, Kansas, the geographical center of the contiguous, or what used to be called Lower 48 states. St. Louis, Missouri, which would have been a wonderful place to be in 1904 if you like food, at the World's Fair there that year. The ice cream cone, iced tea, peanut butter, the hot dog and hamburger, and cotton candy were all introduced to the world. Denver, Colorado, where, speaking of food, the trademark for the name cheeseburger was awarded in 1935 to Louis Ballas. Sturgis, South Dakota, home of the annual Black Hills Classic Motorcycle Rally. Boston, Massachusetts, where the first person to be confined head, hand, and foot in the stocks was none other than the builder of the stocks, Edward Palmer. His crime? He overcharged for his carpentry. Kennewick, Washington, one of eastern Washington's tri-cities, along with Pasco and Richland. Kennewick was once a thriving Columbia River port on whose shores a prehistoric skeleton called the Kennewick Man was discovered in 1996. Boise City, Oklahoma. That's spelled like Boise, Idaho, B-O-I-S-E, but it's Boise City, Idaho. It's the only city in the continental United States to be bombed during World War II. It was one of our own, a B-17 Flying Fortress that bombed Main Street by mistake, as you might imagine, in 1943. This is America. French Lick, Indiana, which made famous as the home of Indiana State University and later Boston Celtic basketball star Larry Bird. Kingsland, Arkansas, the hometown of country music legend Johnny Cash. Cody, Wyoming, named after William Buffalo Bill Cody, whose Wild West shows amazed audiences before and after the turn of the 20th century. Coralville, Iowa, the suburb of the university town of Iowa City, Iowa, is a place where Mormon migrants on their way west in 1856 built sturdy handcarts out of the abundant local timber. Lincoln, Nebraska, which is generally credited with developing the nation's first 911 emergency telephone network in 1968. Other places, though, such as Haleyville, Alabama, have competing claims to this accomplishment. Morgantown, West Virginia, where the nation's first pottery plant was built in 1785. Morgantown is also home to the University of West Virginia, whose sports teams are the Mountaineers. Akron, Ohio, the rubber capital of the world. Elizabethton, Tennessee, where Samuel Powhatan Carter was born in 1819. He was the only person in American history to be both an Army general and a Navy admiral. Johnston, South Carolina, the town that calls itself the peach capital of the world. Of course, so do some towns across the border in the Peach State. Georgia,